You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. In this episode we continue to discuss one of the most controversial legal battles in recent history, focusing on R. Kelly's Chicago appeal where the fundamental principles of law, fairness and justice seem to have been ignored. In this particular release, we will examine how attorney Jennifer Bonjean fearlessly confronted the appeal judges over their single-sided approach, particularly on the issue of the statute of limitations. And we will further explore why the decision to uphold the trial court's ruling raises serious legal concerns. From the very outset of the appeal process, R. Kelly's lead attorney Jennifer Bonjean could sense a troubling bias in the panel of judges. It became evident as she presented arguments regarding the statute of limitations that the court had already aligned itself with the government's position. At one point when arguing out the retroactive nature of the amendment that was made to the law in 2003, Bonjean was constantly interrupted by one of the judges who adamantly kept insisting the government's interpretation was right without applying any critical thinking. According to the judge, because the amendment to the statute of limitations for sexual harassment by Congress was not clear, we can assume it allowed backward effect on actions that supposedly took place in the 90s. In other words, the non-clarity of the amendment can only be interpreted in favor of government and not the defendant. What a biased way to look at the law. But why was this such a critical issue to make it the linchpin of R. Kelly's appeal? To fully understand this, let's break this down. The statute of limitations is a legal principle designed to ensure fairness in criminal proceedings. In its power, it establishes a time frame within which charges must be brought against an individual, preventing accusations from surfacing decades later when evidence may no longer be reliable. And this could be both ways. The prosecution witnesses may suffer blurred memories of events, rendering their testimony satisfactory for proving their case, disadvantaging the plaintiff, and equally the defendant may have lost necessary evidence to aid one's defense. Also, some important defense witnesses whose versions of the story would have counted may have been lost. In fact, in R. Kelly's case, the timeline of the allegations was central and therefore important to the defense. Late as the litigation was, it became almost impossible for the defendant to prepare a proper defense to counteract the cunning government which presented liars such as Lisa Van Allen for witnesses. The fundamental question before the appeals court was whether an amendment to the statute of limitations could apply retroactively to conduct that allegedly occurred years before the amendment was passed. Simply because the original limitation had not yet expired when the change in law was made, it does not mean that changing the circumstances surrounding alleged events from years back was acceptable by law. Remember, this would be a direct violation of Article 1 Clause 9 of our Constitution, which vehemently disallows Congress' enactment of ex post facto laws with a backward effect on past events. Now this is where legal logic and the court's reasoning diverged drastically. Jennifer Bonjean rightfully challenged the judges on their willingness to stretch the law to fit the prosecution's narrative. A law's amendment cannot be applied retroactively, as this would be against the supreme law of this land. This Constitution the judges abused is the fountain of American legal jurisprudence, bearing such important safeguards against government overreach, yet in this case, the judges seem determined to overlook it.
We also agree that you don't need to get to step 2, so we're in agreement on that. But, and obviously we would acknowledge that some of these circuits have already sided with the government's position on this. The issue is in front of the Second Circuit presently, so...
I don't think any circuit has sided with your position.
You're right. Yeah, that's correct, but perhaps there will be a split.
Bonjean's frustration was in fact palpable to see her confront the court, making it clear that their stance was fundamentally flawed and alarmingly one-sided. The statute of limitations exists for a reason, and that is to prevent legal systems from becoming arbitrary in their applications of justice. But in R. Kelly's case, the judges seemed more interested in upholding the government's perspective than in adhering to the rule of law. To put things into perspective, let's further examine the timeline. The alleged offenses date back decades. At the time these incidents supposedly occurred, the law had a clear time frame in which charges could be brought forward. If the state failed to act within that period, the window should have closed. However, years later, lawmakers extended the statute of limitations and prosecutors conveniently used this extension to justify charges that otherwise would have been time-barred. This is not how legal systems should function. If laws can be changed and the amendments applied retroactively at will, then no one is truly safe. Remember, many other laws are not even time-bound with statutes of limitations. Meaning any ambiguous amendment can be assumed to affect events backwards with the judge's interpretation. After all, the amendments are made within periods when the laws are still viable. With this said, I cannot help but laugh at the interpretation by the appeal judges. It's not only flawed but also dramatically incompetent to think this way. Any individual could suddenly find themselves accused of a decades-old offense with no viable way to defend themselves against it. And this sets a dangerous precedent, one that disregards fairness and leans dangerously close to judicial activism. Meanwhile, despite Bonjean's compelling arguments, the appeal judges did not waver. They upheld the lower court's ruling, ignoring the very principles that should have protected R. Kelly from retroactive prosecution. This wasn't just a loss for R. Kelly but also for the integrity of the entire justice system. Legal experts have weighed in on this issue and many agree. The idea that a statute of limitations amendment can be applied to past conduct simply because the original time limit hadn't expired is legally unsound. It contradicts fundamental fairness, something that courts should always strive to uphold. One of the most baffling aspects of this case is the judiciary's unwillingness to engage in a fair and impartial interpretation of the law. The role of judges is not to act as an extension of the prosecution, but rather to serve as neutral arbiters of justice. When Bonjean pointed out their bias, she was met with a defensive reaction of guilt that spoke volumes. It's important to note that Jennifer Bonjean is not just any defense attorney. She has a proven track record of exposing legal flaws in high-profile cases and is in fact the new hope for all accused celebrities in our country all over. She has overturned wrongful convictions and held judicial bodies accountable for unfair rulings. When she speaks about judicial bias, it's because she's seen it firsthand. And in this case, she saw it clearly. The important question remains, if the appeals court can so easily dismiss fundamental legal principles in one case, what does that mean for future cases? If retroactive applications of law can be justified based on convenience rather than principle, then no one is safe from selective prosecution. At the heart of this matter lies a crucial issue that goes beyond R. Kelly. It is about the integrity of the legal system. Laws should not be twisted to fit a narrative, nor should judges abandon impartiality in favor of a predetermined outcome. Jennifer Bonjean saw the bias, she called it out, and yet the system failed to correct itself. This case raises serious questions about the fairness of the judicial process. The fact that the appeal judges did not differ from Bonjean's observations about their bias while passing judgment should concern anyone who believes in the rule of law. What happens when courts prioritize political and public pressure over justice? What happens when legal safeguards are ignored to ensure a targeted conviction? If you believe in fairness, if you believe in the principles of due process and the rule of law, then this issue deserves your attention. Share this video, raise awareness, and continue the conversation. Because today it's R. Kelly, but tomorrow it could be anyone like you and I. If you want to be featured in our video releases, send us your clips by emailing them to hnnewsroom242@gmail.com or use Google Drive for larger files. Be sure to include your name and any details you'd like us to know. We can't wait to showcase your contributions. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say. To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.